Good morning and welcome to this meeting of Western and Southern Area Planning Committee on Thursday the 8th of May 2025. I'd like to thank members and officers for observing the 2-minute silence. For the benefit of the public attending today or watching on the live stream, I'm Councillor Bolwell, Chair of this committee. My Vice Chair is Councillor Isenk. The meeting is being streamed and will be available to view on the Council website after the meeting. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. Can I remind everyone that when you are speaking, please speak directly into the microphones so you can be clearly heard and seen. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting to which the public is invited. All attendees must comply with the ruling of the Chair. They must not interrupt the meeting or cause undue disturbance. To support this, please switch off your mobile phones or select silent mode for the duration of the meeting. And those using Teams, please ensure microphones are on mute and your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Only those who have registered to speak in accordance with the speaking protocol will be invited to address the committee for a maximum of 3 minutes. That will be limited to the first 3 people objecting to and the first 3 people supporting the application to have registered along with the Parish Council and Ward Member. No materials to be circulated to members of the committee. We have one application today. The case officer will be invited to present the report and recommendations. We don't have any public speakers. However, I would have invited members of the public who have registered to speak with the Democratic Services Officer before the deadline to address the committee in the following order: public against, public support, applicant agent, Parish Council and Ward members. Each speaker would have had a maximum of 3 minutes. Following on for the registered public speakers, the planning officers will have the opportunity to address any salient points they wish to clarify, and committee members will be given the opportunity to ask questions of the planning officers before moving on to debate. When we go to councillor questions and debate, for the benefit of the public watching, can the members state their name and ward when addressing the meeting? Now I will move on to the roll call of members. Myself, David Bolwell, Councillor Neil Isenk.
Morning, Chair.
Morning, Neil. Councillor Belinda Borden. Good morning, Belinda. Councillor Simon Christopher. Good morning, Simon. Councillor David Northam. Not present.
So I'm unable to be there in person, so I'm online, so I recognise I can't vote.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Pete Roper. Good morning, Pete. Councillor David Shortell. Good morning, David. And Councillor Kate Weller. Good morning, Kate. Officers involved in today's meeting include Anne Collins, Development Manager, Area Manager, Hannah Massey, Lawyer, Regulatory, Steve Tapscott, Senior Planning Officer, Josh Kennedy, Democratic Services Officer, and Megan Rochester, Senior Democratic Services Officer. Moving on to item 1 on the agenda, apologies. Josh, do we have apologies, please?
Thank you. Yes, so we've had apologies this morning from councillors Louise Bown, Paul Kimber, Craig Monks and Louis O'Leary.
Thank you. Can they be recorded, please? Declarations of interest. Can I ask if any member has any declarations of interest you wish to make? There don't appear to be any. Item 3 on the agenda, to agree and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of April 2025. If members are happy that the minutes are a true record of the meeting held on April the 3rd, 2025, then I will sign them as correct at the end of this meeting. Everybody happy? Yep, thank you. Everyone's in agreement. In that case, I'm moving on to item 4, the public participation. We don't have any. So we'll move straight on to item 5, planning applications. We will now consider application P/FUL/2024/07512, which is Monkton Park, Monkton Hill, Winterbourne, Monkton, DT2 9PS. And this will be presented by Steve Tapscott. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If you just bear with me a second, I will find the presentation. Sorry. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, so this is a site at Monkton Park and Monkton Hill. I'll show you a location plan just in a moment. And the proposal is to erect a single-storey modular building with some perimeter fencing. So here is the site. It is just to the south of Dorchester, about a mile along the Monkton Hill Road. You can see to the west is Maiden Castle, and we've got the small hamlets of Winterbourne Monkton and Winterbourne Herringston nearby. A bit of context, the site is in the open countryside for planning purposes, and it's also within the Dorset National Landscape. It's in the setting of Maiden Castle, as well as a round barrow cemetery, which is just to the southeast of Maiden Castle, and these are scheduled monuments. There's potential for archaeology in this locality. There's an Edwardian building on site, which my colleagues in conservation believe is a non-designated heritage asset. So that means it's not listed, but it does have historic significance that we need to take account of. This site is part of a higher potential ecological network as defined by the Dorset Environmental Record Centre. There are public views from within the complex's car park, which is within the adopted highway. You can also see the site from Maiden Castle, and there is a right-of-way on the eastern side of Maiden Castle. So the site has been used for young people with learning difficulties. Planning records go as far back as the 1960s to show that the use is well established. So a couple of slides on the proposals. You can see here, hopefully my mouse will work. This is what's proposed, the modular building. Next to each one are these little pagodas, which would be split in two. So the main modular building would have 4 classrooms to cater for 4 students, but it could be adaptable to have more students if need be. Each of those students would then have half a pagoda each, and for the good weather, if they get any good weather. And they would each have a small area of outside space. And these areas of outside space would be enclosed by the fencing that forms part of this application. Over here is the rest of the complex, the existing complex. This big block here is the Edwardian building I mentioned just earlier. I'll show you some photos of that in a moment. So they want planning permission for a single-storey modular building with the outside space and pergolas. One of the requirements of this development is a level access. So a small amount of regrading of the land would be needed. The fencing that they seek permission for is 1.8 metres high, though I should state that I've looked into this and there are no restrictive conditions or what we call Article 4 directions that prohibit them from installing fencing up to 2 metres high anyway. So this element of the application would be considered permitted development that doesn't actually require planning permission. As part of the proposals, the 3 trees would be lost. They're not shown on this plan, but there's 1 around the middle here and 2 towards the bottom. To compensate for that, because we're now in the era of biodiversity net gain, a total of 18 trees will be needed. They will be planted to the south of the site within the wider land holding, and a top-up credit for biodiversity net gain for off-site gains would also be needed. So here are some of the proposed plans for the east elevation. The proposed materials are European redwood for vertical cladding, and the roof would be a standing seam metal material. These numbers here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. Those are simply where the modular building would be constructed off-site and then assembled on-site in these 10 parts. Either side are the pergolas and the fencing. So these pergolas would be open-sided with natural wood posts and natural slate roofs. And here are the other 2 elevations for information. So I'll take you through some pictures now. So this first one is a view looking from the southeast within the complex, and it shows the 3 trees that would be removed. Having seen the tree report, these are a mixture of sycamore and ash. The next slide is a view looking towards Maiden Castle from the application site. I should say that Maiden Castle is about 550 metres away. This top one is within where the new building would go, looking back towards the rest of the complex. This building here is the back of the Edwardian building, the non-designated heritage asset I mentioned earlier, and this is the front. So the reason I took this photo from this angle is because this is part of the highway and therefore publicly viewable. And you can see just past the building, in this little gap here, that is where the development would go. So glimpses of it would be possible from this public vantage point. I managed to find a nice day in February to go up to Maiden Castle, and you can just about make the site out here. I have zoomed this one in for additional context. You can quite clearly see the complex is visible, part of the landscape. Given that it was the depths of winter, you can't see the three trees particularly well. I'd imagine this time of year, now that we're into spring, they will be in leaf and offering a bit more of a screening effect. So this other photo, I've taken it from Google. As luck would have it, somebody went to the time and expense of hiring a plane to take some photos of the site. And this one's quite useful because it does give another perspective of the site, including those trees. And this area here where the cars are parked and this area of greenery is where the new building would go. So in terms of the principle of development, as this is a site in the open countryside, policy sus2 of the local plan is the key overarching policy. That policy does strictly control development in countryside locations, but with a number of exceptions, one of which is educational/training related development, which we believe this would be. The flesh to the bones of that policy comes within policy COM6 of the local plan, which relates to the provision of new education and training facilities. There are essentially two policy tests that come from COM6. The first is that the location needs to be well linked and accessible to the local catchment. And the second criterion is that any loss of facilities should be re-provided to the same or a higher standard. So I'll just address both of those policy requirements. So being well linked and accessible, well, this site is obviously well established. It has been for over 60 years. Admittedly, users of the site are likely to be car dependent because of their complex educational needs, and it is in the countryside. But this is a specialist establishment. It's therefore different from a more typical education establishment that will have a more localised catchment. But nevertheless, where it is, to the south of Dorchester, to the north of Weymouth, it is within two large catchment populations. There are also nearby villages. So it's not strictly well linked and accessible, but which suggests a minor policy conflict. But I think on balance, given those factors, that conflict is outweighed. With respect to the second criterion about the loss of facilities, it could potentially be argued that the existing car parking on the site and the open space that would be developed on could be facilities. That a total of 16 car parking spaces will be lost. But this is a substantial site, plenty of parking elsewhere and plenty of other open space. So on balance, we do not see that there's a need to re-provide that lost space elsewhere. So in light of those factors, we recommend that the proposal is acceptable under policies sus2 and COM6 of the local plan. Turning next to the impacts on local character, the national landscape, heritage, which includes scheduled monuments and the main school building. So as this is a national landscape, there's a duty on us from national policy to attribute great weight to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty. There's a similar test of great weight towards conserving the two scheduled monuments, Maiden Castle and the Round Barrow Cemetery. The test for the non-designated heritage asset, that Edwardian building, is slightly lighter touch, where the committee needs to form a balanced judgment having regard to the scale of any harm and the significance of the heritage asset itself. So with that in mind, we've seen the photographs. The principal concerns would be the impacts on public views. So Maiden Castle, as I said just before, is around 550 metres away. So the views towards the application site are quite distant. The application site is filtered by some boundary vegetation, including the trees that would be removed under this proposal. But it must be borne in mind that the existing complex contains 2 to 3 story buildings. They're already present, you could see from the photographs. And so the trees as well are category C trees according to the submitted tree report. So trees are categorized in 4 different ways. A is the best, B second best, C is low quality, U is effectively dying or dead already. So these aren't great quality trees. They could in fact be removed anyway because they're not protected by a tree preservation order. So whilst the removal of these trees would have an impact, because at the moment they do soften views slightly, it would be difficult to sustain an objection that their removal would result in material harm. Also to bear in mind that a total of 18 trees are proposed elsewhere on the site, which would provide a net increase at the site. Also, if you're standing at Maiden Castle, whilst you would probably notice the complex, that's not the key view here. Maiden Castle has some very attractive and wide views from the top, and you're more likely to be focusing on that rather than this complex of buildings. In terms of the detailed design of the development, the European redwood is an appropriate material, we believe. The sheet metal roof would also be appropriate, and the pergola structures with their natural wood finish and natural slate are all acceptable, and we can secure those by a planning condition. So taking all that in the round, the single-story scale of the proposals, the acceptable design, the separation from public vantage points, and the lack of material harm from the removal of the trees, we believe that the scenic beauty of the national landscape would be conserved and no harm would arise to the setting of Maiden Castle or the cemetery, Round Barrow Cemetery, and there would be no harm to the setting of the Edwardian school building. Next consideration is archaeology. Prior to the submission of this application, some trial trenches were dug, and the council's archaeologist has reviewed the information that was submitted and raises no objections at all. In terms of neighbouring amenity, there are no neighbours, so no harm would arise from the presence of this building or the use of the land. Turning next to highway impacts, the local highway authority raises no objections. This is in terms of impacts on the local network, the access, or the loss of parking. In respect of ecology, as I mentioned earlier, it's part of the high potential ecological network, and the applicant has submitted to us an ecological report with a biodiversity plan that has been agreed by the natural environment team at the council, and it can be conditioned to any grant of planning permission. It includes mitigation enhancement measures in the form of bird boxes and some native planting. In respect of biodiversity net gain, the requirement is to demonstrate at least 10%. So the loss of the trees, plus some of the grass at the site and other bits and pieces of vegetation, would result in a loss of biodiversity. So in order to compensate for that, a total of 18 trees are proposed to the south. That wouldn't be enough to completely demonstrate the 10%, so an off-site credit would need to be purchased as well. But it's important to stress that BNG is dealt with post-decision, and all that's required of the applicant at this stage is to demonstrate something that's technically achievable. We are satisfied that their strategy is technically achievable, but if when it comes to discharging the BNG condition at a later date, the applicant can always change their strategy. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the full 18 trees and the off-site contribution would be required. There could be various permutations amongst that. So as it stands, the provision of these new trees would constitute on-site significant according to the BNG regulations. And what that basically means is that a habitat management and monitoring plan would also need to be discharged at the conditions stage, but also that would need to be secured by a Section 106 legal agreement. So the recommendation is to approve the application, subject to 6 conditions listed there. Just to quickly run through them. The first is the standard 3-year time limit for implementation. Second one is the standard condition to approve the plans and drawings. The third one is the one I just mentioned, the pre-commencement habitat management and monitoring plan in relation to the biodiversity net gain strategy. Once that's been approved and once it's been undertaken, we then need to approve a completion report for the habitat management and monitoring plan. The 5th condition is the schedule of materials, just to make clear what those are. And finally, the compliance with the approved ecological assessment and biodiversity plan. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Very clear. Members, does anybody have any technical questions for the officer, please? Councillor Borden.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. Can you just explain, just towards the end, you mentioned something about, was it Section 106? How's that going to work? Is that part of the ensuring that the ecological assessment is, the ecological plan is actually carried out?
Yes, that's correct. So because the planting of these 18 trees would constitute on-site significant, that's the term given in the legislation, anything that is on-site significant needs to be secured by a Section 106 agreement in order to make sure that the habitat management and monitoring plan is delivered. So that's always done post-decision. So it's not something for the committee to agree upon today, but so it's just for information.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? Belinda, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I was just, presumably because the trees, the 18 trees are going to be planted elsewhere, presumably there's no scope for them to be planted in front of the proposed block to reduce the visual impact. Presumably that's because the space isn't there to do that.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Councillor Shortell.
Would this result in additional traffic coming in from the A354 to service the new building? And is the provisions for that increase in traffic, if there is some, have been made?
Well, we referred the application to the local highway authority and they've raised no objections in terms of the safety of the access, impacts on the local network, or parking, in fact. So also this building is to accommodate around 4 individuals. So whilst the building could theoretically accommodate more because it's special needs school, it's unlikely that it would be very intensely used. But on that basis, no objections are raised by highways. So I don't think that's a particular concern.
I also noted that, in fact, there's no provision for overnight accommodation there, so there'd be no one staying over overnight.
Not in this development, no. But I do understand that within the wider site there is overnight accommodation, and historically it's been used, I think, for hostel accommodation at one point for people with special needs. So there could well be accommodation elsewhere, but this particular proposal wouldn't facilitate that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Isank, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question around the biodiversity net gain, actually. I understand the complexity about tweaking it in relation to the site and having conditions in relation to how the biodiversity net gain is dealt with. But I do have a niggling sense. It's a bit of a shame that we're looking at off-site credits if we could actually achieve the biodiversity net gain on site. And I wondered if from a technical perspective, it would be possible to put an informative note for the applicant, which is obviously us, to do their best to try and achieve biodiversity net gain on site if at all possible. Could that be dealt with via an informative note?
Councillor, I did it again. Anne, please, would you like to come in on that one?
Yes, when they come to discharge their biodiversity net gain conditions, there is a habitat hierarchy that we expect applicants to go through in terms of looking at first on-site provision, off-site provision, local credits and purchase of national credits, and they do have to demonstrate they've been through that biodiversity hierarchy. Biodiversity net gain is a bit unusual compared to other things in planning because it's essentially dealt with post-decision, and we only have to have very, very limited information as part of the planning application. So they can change their mind about what they want to do, which is what Steve said. We are entitled to put an informative on, drawing their attention to the biodiversity net gain hierarchy, and they should be looking on-site or off-site within their ownership before we kind of go to credits elsewhere, even outside of Dorset.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. Are you happy with that, Councillor Isank? Yeah. Okay, thanks. If there's no more technical questions, okay, Councillor Roper.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Pete Roper, Portland Ward. I just got a quick question regarding the trees and the tree inspection report. I think there's actually sort of 9 that are sort of recommended to be cut down to ground level. Are the three trees that are mentioned in your report, are they part? Are they included in the tree inspection report?
Sorry. Yes, they are. They are. I believe they're labelled H1 to 3 in the report. It summarises that they are a mixture of ash and sycamore, and the ash that's in there has got ash dieback, which is worth knowing, I think.
Yeah, thanks. So, and just sort of clarify that the remaining 6, they are actually outside of the consideration of this planning application. Is that correct?
Well, the remaining 6 are very small specimens, so they don't really warrant that level of considerations compared with the 3 that are the mature trees. So the removal of those 3 trees are the ones that would have the impact. The other 6 specimens, they are smaller, and therefore their loss is material in terms of the biodiversity loss rather than the visual impact.
Thank you for that. Councillor Christopher, please.
Thank you, Chair. A personal indulgence. It does strike me that it was 10 years ago this week that I was first elected to a local authority, i.e. the Old West Dorset District Council. And for most of that time, I've sat on a planning committee. And I think it's particularly interesting looking at this building which is essentially a change of use from what it was decades ago. And where there is an idea of having an extension to the host building, I can only think that is positive. So without speaking for too long, I would say this is a positive thing. So many times with planning committees, one can be so frustrated. I've sat on a planning committee and I've listened to debates about Dorchester Prison and nothing has happened. I've sat on planning committees talking about empty hotels in Lyme Regis that have been empty for almost 40 years and nothing has happened. So I'm happy to recommend approval with making the final comment that we should clearly consider best practice in terms of on-site biodiversity net gain. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Christopher. So I'll take that we've actually moved into debate if members are happy, and in that case I will take that proposal. Councillor Weller, please.
Happy to second that proposal.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. Does anybody else wish to speak to this motion, please? There doesn't seem to be any debate to have. So in that case, I'll ask members to show by a show of hands whether they are happy to approve this recommendation or not. All those in favour, please. And that is unanimous. So in that case, this application is approved, including the conditions. Thank you. Now moving on to item 6, urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 7, exempt business. There is no exempt business. In that case, thank you all for attending today. I realise it's only been one application, but it was important we dealt with this one. So thanks again, and I now declare the meeting closed at 10:34. Thank you.